Então, gente, boa tarde. Vou começar a sessão em português, já já a gente vai passar para inglês, tá? Então, boa tarde, muito prazer. Meu nome é Simone Ferreira, eu sou orientadora do EducationUSA na PUC Rio de Janeiro. Eu tenho aqui hoje comigo a orientadora Mariana Paneiro, que vai acompanhar vocês durante essa online session, e a pessoa que vai apresentar a sessão, que é a Noelani Bernal. A Noelani, inclusive, é uma aluna da University of Chicago. Eu vou pedir para todo mundo que está na sala, por favor, desligar os seus microfones, tá? Mute your mic, please. Stan, your mic is on. Por favor, tirem o som dos seus microfones. E também a gente vai pedir para vocês guardarem as perguntas, anotarem as suas perguntas, que no final da session a Noelani vai responder as perguntas, tá bom? Deixa eu falar um pouquinho para vocês o que é o EducationUSA. Então, para aquelas pessoas que não estão muito familiarizadas, o EducationUSA é a fonte oficial de informações sobre estudos nos Estados Unidos. Nós somos um órgão ligado ao Departamento de Estado americano que orienta pessoas que querem estudar nos Estados Unidos, que querem fazer algum curso superior nos Estados Unidos. Nós trabalhamos em vários lugares do mundo, ou seja, nós temos vários centros EducationUSA pelo mundo, em mais de 170 países, temos mais de 400 centros. No Brasil, nós temos 39 centros, sendo que no Rio de Janeiro, no Brasil temos 39 e no Rio de Janeiro temos 2. O centro no qual nós trabalhamos, que fica localizado na PUC Rio, e temos mais um centro em Copacabana, né? Então, assim, vocês pensarem em educação superior norte-americana, quem é a fonte oficial é o EducationUSA. Como a gente pode ajudar as pessoas a fazerem a sua candidatura? Da seguinte maneira, tudo que você precisa de informações oficiais e ajuda, orientação realmente para poder fazer a sua candidatura, o EducationUSA pode ajudar. Então, convido vocês para entrarem no nosso site, www.educationusa.org.br, nas nossas mídias sociais, EducationUSA Brasil, EducationUSA Rio de Janeiro, no Facebook e no Instagram também, tá bom? Caso vocês tenham dúvida, vocês podem mandar um e-mail para rio.puc@educationusa.org. Ok? E agora eu vou mudar para o inglês. So everyone, good afternoon. This is Noelani Bernal. Noelani, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. As I said before, please mute your mics and keep your questions for the end of the presentation. Noelani will be glad to answer all your questions. Noelani, the floor is yours. I'm going to mute my mic. I'm going to be around here for a while, and Mariana is with you, okay?
Thank you,
Have
Simone.
fun. You're welcome.
Hi, everyone. Like Simone said, my name is Noelani. I'm currently in Chicago, although I'm interning at the office in Rio. I'm currently a student at the University of Chicago. I'm in my senior year, or I will be starting. The school year is different. I'll be starting September. And I'm really excited to go through this with you. I'm going to just give a brief overview today of the reading and writing sections of the TOEFL. Tomorrow, we have another session where I'll be giving a brief overview of the listening and speaking. So with the time that we have, I'm not going to be able to go through all of the information, everything that you need to prepare for the test, but this at least will hopefully get you a little bit more familiar with it so that if you open a book or a practice test, it won't look completely foreign to you. So just give me a second. I'm going to share the presentation. And also, please let me know if I'm speaking too fast. Sometimes I tend to do that. So if at any point of the presentation you need me to slow down or clarify something, please let me know. Otherwise, we will save the questions to the end, like Simone was saying. Okay, it's just loading. Sorry about that. Cool. Okay. Like I was saying before, we're going to go over the reading and writing sections today. So just to reiterate, what is the TOEFL and why should I take it? The TOEFL is the English or the test of English as a foreign language. Most students that apply to American universities, either for their undergraduate or any graduate degree, must submit some sort of certification of English proficiency. And this is the most widely accepted out of all of the American colleges and universities anyway. So today we're going to be really looking at the reading and writing sections again. I just wanted to show you guys how much time you would get. This is a really nice layout of how the test is structured. So as you can see, the reading section, it's about an hour, 54 to 72 minutes. You're going to get 30 to 40 questions and pretty self-explanatory. You're going to read the passages and to respond to the questions about the passages. It's testing your comprehension. But every test varies a little bit, so that's why there's that range of time and questions. And for the writing section, it's standard 50 minutes every time. You're going to have 2 tasks. That basically means that you're going to write 2 essays. One of them, you're going to have to read a passage, listen to a recording, and write a response to those 2 materials that you were given. And the other one, they give you a question and you respond with your own opinion. They're 2 different types of texts. Okay, so let's go over reading. So like I said, it's around an hour long. You're going to get 3 to 4 passages. The passages are around 700 words in length. So if you think about it, that's about a page, single space. And you're going to get 3 or 4 of those to complete along with all the questions. So it's kind of a lot of reading, especially if it's a little bit dense. And no matter what, you're going to get 10 questions per passage. So hopefully just knowing these facts can help you with the timing of it at least. The main purpose of the reading portion is to test how well you're able to find information in that time constraint that you're given, how well you're able to comprehend it, and also you're going to be presented with a lot of material that you might not be familiar with before you even took the test. And so that's another way that they try to see how well can you identify information in English in a certain amount of time. A few basic tips for the reading section is read every answer choice intentionally. I know that's pretty cliche and pretty a generic tip, but honestly, when I don't know if any of you guys have taken a timed test before, but when you're in the moment, it's kind of easy to try to jump around as fast as you can through the text. But the thing is, the TOEFL actually tries to trick you with some answers and trick you with some of the ways that they word questions. And so it's really important to make sure that you're very thorough as you're going through the text, going through the questions and going through the answers. So make sure you read all your options before selecting an answer choice, just so that you don't accidentally get fooled. Another really good tip that I think is important for the TOEFL is every single answer that you choose will have evidence from the passage. So what does that mean? Every correct answer, you will be able to directly link back to something said in the passage that makes that answer true. So if you're thinking about 2 answer choices and you can't figure out, you think that they're both right, or they both could be right. If you can't link one of them back to evidence in the passage, then it's not going to be a correct answer. There are a few ways that you can practice. I know it's just beyond taking practice tests. One way is to try to increase your vocabulary. As you can probably tell from the different texts that are going to be given in the TOEFL, there will be more advanced vocab in general. So some ways that you can refine your vocab skills to make it a little bit easier to make sure that you can get through the text a little faster is to make word lists and vocab lists. You can organize these vocab lists based on topics or fields of study, because you're going to have an array, all different kinds of texts that might come up. You can look up, there are plenty of lists already made on the internet. If you just Google some that are there, you can make your own. I think that's a little bit better because then you can choose which words that you struggle with a little bit more. But that is a super great way to kind of boost your vocab, because it'll also help you with other sections of the TOEFL as well. But for reading, it'll just make the section go a little bit faster. So I'm not going to go over all types of TOEFL reading questions again, because given the amount of time we have today, but this is just a brief overview of the kinds of questions that will come up in the TOEFL no matter what. So hopefully you'll get a better sense of what they look like. The most basic kind of question is based on factual information. They're the easiest ones to be able to answer because it's super easy to find the answer in the text compared to some more ambiguous questions that the TOEFL might be asking you. The information is always explicitly stated. And so again, if there's no evidence to back up the answer choice, then it's not going to be a correct answer choice. These kind of questions, you can really identify keywords and phrases from the answer choices in order to bring back to the text, either through synonyms. Maybe they actually use the same phrase that's worded in the actual passage. But keep in mind that actually might be a way that they trick you. So even though they may have words in common with the passage, the TOEFL, again, wants to trick you. Make sure that every answer choice that you choose, you can, or is most likely to be actually present in the passage. So kind of on the opposite end of that, you will also have negative factual questions. So they're similar to the factual questions, but it's what's not stated in the passage. So you might get a question that says, okay, well, out of these answer choices, which one is not stated in the passage or represented? Which one did the author not talk about? So the same technique, just use keywords to be able to identify, link all your answers back to what is actually in the passage. Okay, so now we're getting into a little bit more ambiguous questions because you can't really find, or it's more difficult to find the answer because it's not explicitly stated. So just be careful with inference questions. These are the ones that require you to make conclusions or assumptions based on what you've read. So look for language like always, forever, never, all, totally, completely. Those kinds of phrasing in the questions are basically triggering that it's going to be an inference question. So keep an eye out for those. Most times they're incorrect because those generalizations are a little too broad for exact answer choices. So these are the kinds of things that you can also add to your word list of helpful words, unhelpful words. So also for the inference questions, they might paraphrase the answers, paraphrase parts of the text that they turn into the answer, sorry. So make sure, again, link it back to the text. If the paraphrasing isn't actually what's being said in the text, it's not going to be the right answer. I know that is pretty straightforward, but something to keep in mind when you're taking a timed test. And that being said, don't infer too much. So yes, you can make assumptions, but they always must be logical assumptions. If it seems like an answer choice might be a little bit too out there to be able to link back to the text, that also isn't going to be the correct one. So rhetorical purpose questions are another more difficult type of question that you'll come across. So if you read a text, these are the kinds of questions that ask you why the author wrote something the way they did. Why did they use the language to write the passage the way they did? What is the purpose, the underlying purpose? So these are to test you to see whether or not you understand the meaning beyond just the words. Do you understand English beyond just the definitions? You need to understand the entire passage as a whole and its implications and importance. So these are also examples of keywords that you can kind of memorize because these are the words that will appear in the questions that trigger rhetorical questions. So whenever you see words like explain, contrast, refute, to note, if they're asking how the author or why the author tends to do these things, that is a key for you to understand that this is going to be more of a difficult question to answer. Another type of question is going to be vocabulary. These are very, very straightforward, nothing hidden about this. So they're going to choose a more difficult word in the text and they're going to test your knowledge. So let's see an example of just what it looks like. You have a few sentences here on the side. You can see that the word unprecedented is emboldened, and that's the word that they're going to be testing you on the right, obviously. The best way to do these kinds of questions is to substitute each answer choice that you might be, you think might be correct into the place where the bolded word is, here, unprecedented, and see if it makes sense. If you look at the answer choices, they're more common than the actual word that they're testing for. So that should give you an idea of how to answer these in a more quick way. So, okay, so same example here. We're going to look at the first sentence. It says the 20th century was indeed a period of breaking away from everything that ballet stood for. So that is going to be your clue to what kind of message that this author is trying to convey to the readers. And you want to make sure that whatever answer choices that you substitute for unprecedented, which is actually not bolded here, makes that passage flow. So you don't want to choose the word unique, for example, because it doesn't make sense in this certain passage. So look for stuff behind or before it and look through the sentences after it to make sure that the entire chunk of text makes sense when you substitute that word. There are also reference questions. You will be identifying what a given pronoun refers to. So if you get a question, what does the word this refer to? It'll tell you which this they're referring to in the text. But basically, another way to do this is to also substitute the things that you might think this is referring to and see also if that makes sense. Instead of this, it might be it might be he, it might be her, it might be they. If it's a plural one, make sure that whatever they is referring to is also going to be plural in your answer choice. Those are little clues to narrow down answers to those questions as well. So this is possibly a kind of question that you guys might not have seen before. The multiple choices questions basically can have multiple answers. So this is why it's really, really important to read every answer choice whenever you come across these, which aren't super, you're not going to have a ton of these per TOEFL test, but you're definitely going to have a few. And again, this may seem like obvious advice, but considering that sometimes TOEFL wants you to think one thing and stray you away from the right answer, reading through all of your options is kind of your only way to make sure that you're keeping on track and that you're not getting tricked by TOEFL. And again, look for the evidence in the passage. Even if there are 2 or 3 correct answers out of 5, then you must read. So even if there are 3 correct answers out of 5, every answer choice out of the 3 must have some concrete clue in the text that that answer is correct. Okay, another kind of unique question to TOEFL is the sentence insertion questions. They look a little bit complicated, but they're really not. So whenever you see this black square, like in the 3rd bullet here, that's going to signal that it's going to be a sentence insertion. So basically, wherever they have a black square, they're going to ask you, they're going to give you a sentence, and you have to decide which of the black squares it fits best. So here is an example of what it's going to look like. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but if you look on the right, you see the sentence, these efforts have changed the art of ballet in very significant ways. And then you get 4 options for where you should be putting that sentence for where it makes sense. And then just to kind of accelerate answering this question, we're going to look at the left with the word attempts bolded. Basically, it says, since the ballet's Russes, I don't actually know how to pronounce that, began revolutionizing ballet in the early 20th century, there have been continued attempts to break the mold of classical ballet. So that is a good symbol. The word attempts refers, or these efforts in the answer, or in the sentence that you need to insert, can actually be linked back to the word attempt. So do you see how it can actually be linked back to words in the actual text? You don't want to infer anything beyond what's being presented to you. So after that sentence, it makes sense to put, these efforts have changed the art of ballet in many significant ways. Okay, table questions. These are also an example of a more difficult question. Just like the other ones, you're going to have to understand the entire passage rather than just the single paragraph. And so again, more holistic understanding of the passage beyond just understanding the words on the page, the nuances of the passage, if you will. You want to spend some more time, budget a little bit more time working on these ones, just because they're going to take longer, just like the ones that have multiple choices, or for the sentence insertion, they're going to take a little bit longer than the other ones. And so keep that in mind as you're budgeting your time throughout the test. Sometimes you're going to have to categorize certain things. You're going to point out certain ideas or sentences about the text, and they're going to give you subheadings, and they're going to tell you, okay, what is the best way to organize these parts of the text or these main ideas. Some of the statements might actually be less important, but make sure, again, read through everything just so that you get the gist of it. I have a picture here of what these are going to look like. So it looks like a lot of words. It really does. You're going to have the options here on the side. And if you look at the bottom there, you have types of concerts. It's a little small. But one column is types of concerts and the other one is statements. So you're going to go through A through G, and you're going to see which ones apply to rock or pop and which ones apply to classical. And they're already going to tell you under statements, if you see next to rock and pop, there are 2 answer choices, and next to classical, there are going to be 3. Okay, so this is already as if you were to go through the passage, cross out the irrelevant answer choices, because again, all the answers need to be able to be linked back to part of the text. And the answer choices that are not crossed off, which all have evidence from the text that support it, you're going to go ahead and put those in under the statements next to rock and pop, or pop and classical. And look, there are, like we were talking about, under statements, there are 5 that you need to fill in, and so that's a good way to figure out how many you need to cross off. So if you look on the right, after you cross off the incorrect or irrelevant information, you're going to have 5 to choose from. So other kinds of table questions that you might get, instead of just classifying into the types of music, you might get cause and effect, you might get problem and solution, you might get comparison types of questions. The extra answers that are not correct, that they're putting there to confuse you, won't actually, or sometimes don't actually have to do with the topic in the passage. They're going to misinterpret certain relationships. So again, that's another reason why really looking at the passage holistically and understanding the different components is very important. And some will be similar to the topic, but because they're not stated in the passage or they don't have evidence from the passage, they're technically not correct answers because they're too irrelevant in that sense. Okay, so I have a few practice questions. If you guys could just read through this small paragraph. I have the question and the answer. If you guys just want to go through it for the next minute or so, you can go ahead and type your answers in the chat and we'll see if you've internalized any of the information. I'll give you guys another 30 seconds or so. Whenever you think you have the correct answer, go ahead and drop it in the chat and then we'll go over the correct answer after. Got a few different answers. Where's the question? The question is on the screen that's being displayed at the moment under the passage. Okay, anyone else? Okay, awesome. Let's see what the correct answer is. It is B. Good job. So let's take a look. You guys all got the gist of the paragraph in this past few minutes, so let's just go through the answer choices really quick. The question is, in paragraph 1, each of the following is mentioned as a feature of the city of Teotihuacan between AD 150 and 700, except. So this one is a little bit trickier because you're finding the answer choice that does not have evidence in the passage. So let's look. We can see that in this long sentence in the middle, it had over 2,000 apartment complexes, a great market, a large number of industrial workshops, an administrative center, a number of massive religious edifices, and a regular grid pattern of streets and buildings. So in that one sentence out of the entire paragraph, you're able to find evidence for D, apartment complexes, for C, workshops, and for A, regularly arranged streets. So the only one that you don't have evidence for is B. And as you just realized from this small question, some of the wording is kind of different, right? So that's another reason why studying the vocab is really important so that these kind of or if they change the vocab and the answer choices, then it's not going to throw you off completely. I have one more question that we're going to practice before we go into writing. So go ahead, take another 2 minutes or so to read through this. And we're going to go over the answers after. It looks like there are 5 answer choices, but D actually is 2 lines long, so you still only have 4 to choose from. Go ahead and drop your answer in the chat when you are ready. Maybe another 30 seconds if you're trying to decide between an answer. Try to find evidence in the text and send in your guess. Anybody else want to send in a wild guess before we go through the answers? We got some coming in. You got nothing to lose. Just send in a letter. Got a few different thoughts about the right answer. Okay, let's see. The answer is A, a well-exploited and readily available commodity. So let's look at the text real quick. In the first sentence, I hope you can see that a competitive edge over its neighbors, that phrase is actually slightly highlighted. I don't think it's coming across well on the screen, but it gives you a clue to what they're referring to exactly. So if we read the first sentence, it seems like that Teotihuacan's natural resources, along with the city elite's ability to recognize their potential, gave the city a competitive edge over its neighbors. So in that first sentence alone, it talks about the natural resources, or introduces the natural resources that later they talk about how it contributes to their blossoming civilization. But the natural resources that they're able to sell and they're able to, they're basically valuable to other populations. That is what's summarized in A that you kind of infer from the text, but in the end, it links back to Teotihuacan's natural resources. That is the only option that has enough evidence in the text to make it correct. Okay, let's move on to writing. I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but you're going to have 2 writing tasks, which means essays. I don't know why they have a fancy word for this. But the first one is going to be 20 minutes. That's really not that much time. You're going to be reading a passage. You're going to be listening to a snippet of a lecture, and then you're going to be responding to it. The passage and the clip might agree with each other, or they might be different opinions about the same topic. You just won't know until you get there. You're going to be asked to summarize the points in the listening passage because you only get to listen to it once. We'll get into more detail in a second. And explain how they relate to specific points in the reading passage. So note here that nowhere in this question they're going to ask you for your opinion. I think that is more common in Brazilian types of writing than in American types of writing, because in American types of writing, everyone wants to put their opinion in stuff. And then we're going to have the independent writing task. You're going to have 30 minutes. You're presented with a very broad question, and then you're going to be able to answer it in whatever way you want, as long as you give evidence and you support your opinion. Okay, so for an argument-based essay, Toefl wants you to state a claim. So your thesis statement, what are you trying to prove in your response? Add evidence. So you're going to have to prove what from the text or what from the listening passage. That's why, yes, please take notes while you're listening to the part of the lecture, because you're not going to be able to re-listen to it. So what parts from the passage and what parts from the lecture can you add to your argument to make it stronger? The more specific that you can add to it, the stronger your argument is going to be. They know that if you only listen to the passage once, you might not have the most articulate points, but as long as you're able to summarize the gist or point out certain parts of the listening part, that's good enough. They're not asking for perfect, but just some strategies to help you think about it. And a conclusion, if you have time, just summarize your thesis statement in the beginning. Okay, so a little bit more broken down, the integrated essay with the reading and the listening. You're going to have 3 minutes to read the passage. No matter what, the passage isn't going to go away. You can hold on to it, keep your notes that have to do with it, that's fine. However, the short lecture related to the topic, you're only going to be able to listen to it once. So again, make sure that you're taking good notes as you're listening to that, because you're not going to have another chance to go through that. And then your essay, you're going to talk about the relationship between what you heard and what you read. The nice thing is that because you'll have the reading passage in front of you, you can always refer back to the points no matter what. So just make sure that you take those 3 minutes in the beginning to really at least get the gist of it. You can go back for specifics, but during the writing portion, you don't want to waste time going through the reading passage again to get the gist of it, because you only get 20 minutes to be able to write a good essay about this. And then just an extra bit of information. A lot of these types of, or this writing task is typically their way of testing how well you understand academic types of information. So this would mimic what you might read for a class here, or what you might hear in a lecture. And so they really want you to be able to identify key parts of certain passages or certain lectures, especially with material that you might not be familiar with. Okay, so this is just kind of what I've been saying in the past few minutes, but all on one slide. The suggested length is 150 to 225 words. That's really not that long. Again, because it's only 20 minutes, it's not like you're going to have a bunch of time to write a very, very well thought out essay. So that's another reason why picking out the key points of the passage and the lecture as you're going through them will make this process so much easier while you're actually putting together your information, forming your claim. So this passage and this lecture relate to each other in this way, and this way, and this way, or because they both talk about this. Or this lecture disagrees with the passage in these ways because the passage says this, the lecture says this. Don't add your opinion again. I think Again, with Brazilian writing, that's not as much of a problem. So in this essay, you're purely trying to prove how they relate to each other. I just wanted to show you guys the scoring rubric for this specific essay so that if you choose to try this at home, you know exactly how to grade it after. A response, which is a 5, a response at this level successfully selects the important information from the lecture and coherently and accurately presents this information in relation to the relevant information presented in the reading. The response is well organized, and occasional language errors that are present do not result in inaccurate and imprecise presentation of content or connections. That sounded like a lot of words, but what I've been saying before, just in this sense, it's a little bit more fancy. You have to be answering the prompts and making sure that the reading and the listening, you are integrating and either comparing or contrasting based on whether or not they agree or disagree. Organize your essay, like we talked about. Start with your claim, start the next paragraph, talk about your evidence and explain why these evidence support your claim or the use of this evidence supports your claim. And again, because it's timed, because it's not that long, if you make the occasional error, don't stress about it. If you forget an R or you forget, just if you add another word by accident, it's not going to be detrimental. Don't worry about it. As long as it's not detracting from the coherency of your essay and people are going to be able to understand it as they read it, that is the most important thing for getting a score like this. Okay, so this is just a basic way, an example of how you might take notes while you're reading the passage and listening to the lecture, just to get the main ideas down so you don't have to waste time by going back. Again, don't worry about being too exact. You don't have to be completely meticulous in any way because of the time constraint, but be precise and be intentional as you're going through it. You don't have to memorize all the details. So as long as you get the big ideas and key relationships, although some details might be helpful, that's not the point of the exercise. So as you're going through the reading passage and the listening, the lecture, you can note, okay, well, what is the claim of each of them, just side by side, and then argument 1 and counter argument 1 through 3. Those are the bits of evidence that you're going to be able to integrate into your essay as you write it. I can't stress enough how important it is to outline for these kinds of tests. I know that my teachers always encouraged me to spend way more time outlining than I think I needed, so that writing it is the easiest part because the outline you already put all of your thoughts together and you just have to actually put them in complete sentences. Okay, so the independent essay, you were presented with a question that you are supposed to be inserting your opinion. So that can be a little bit misleading because you don't actually have to believe in the opinion that you choose to write about if you think that another argument is easier. So for example, this is a little too simple to be put on the test, but if you have to argue that your favorite ice cream is chocolate, but your favorite ice cream is actually pistachio or something, but it's easier to argue chocolate, go for the easier argument. They're not going to know that your favorite ice cream is not that one. You're going to have 30 minutes to write a response to it. And yeah, don't stress about writing the perfect paper. If it's easier to go with an opinion that's not yours, go for it, as long as you support it well enough. Okay, so outline again. Outline these types of papers, because if you just start to write and you don't have the material to fill out the paper, you're going to have to keep going back and forth and back and forth. And then by the time you realize the session is over. So keep track of your time as well. Keep a lookout so that you try to finish your paper by, I don't know, a few minutes before it's due, and you can go through, make sure there's no detrimental errors, fix some spelling mistakes, some grammar mistakes, whatever it is. This was always the hardest part for me. I always like to write and write and write and write, and I lose track of time. So this is a skill that isn't necessarily linked to an English test, right? It's just because you have not that much time to do it, you have to think smarter. And you're allowed to use personal experiences and other sources of knowledge to support your claim as evidence because you're not going to have a passage to go off of. So what are you going to be graded on? You're going to be graded on development, organization, and language use. So how well are you able to communicate your ideas for development? Does your argument make sense, and is it organized in a way that's coherent, that's logical? Is it easy to read and to go through and to understand? And then are you using language that's appropriate for your text? So this is not the time to start using fancy words that you think you know the meaning behind, but aren't actually sure. Best way to go about this, make sure that you're using vocabulary that you know. If you can't think of a fancier word to describe what you're trying to say, that's okay, because you don't want to risk sounding like you don't know what you're talking about, because they're going to be able to pick up on that as they're scoring your paper. So the actual rubric for this to get a perfect score is the following. An essay at this level largely accomplishes all of the following: effectively addresses the topic and task, so answer the prompt, is well organized and well developed, using clearly appropriate explanations, exemplifications, and or details, displays unity, progression, and coherence, so basically that it makes sense, and displays consistent facility in the use of language, demonstrating syntactic variety, appropriate word choice, and idiomaticity, though it may have minor lexical or grammatical errors. Okay, a lot of fancy words there. That was a mouthful. But basically, are you using grammar correctly? Are you using language correctly? Minor mistakes, whatever, not a big deal, but it shouldn't detract from the argument of your essay. Okay, so after I've given this huge overview, how are some ways that you can really refine these tips and practice at home? So one way to do this is to get more exposure to English. That's a little self-explanatory and pretty obvious. But because you're going to be tested in your knowledge of academic English, try to branch out, read things beyond pop culture, for example. If you're into following American pop culture, that's awesome for English conversation, but look into actual journals, look into the New York Times, look into academic texts that will help you get used to the wording and the formality of academic English. And here we have some resources, or some examples of resources that you can use, such as BBC and NPR, textbooks, movies about American university life, documentaries. And here, if you want to jot down this link real quick, is a link to a vocab list that I was talking about the importance of at the beginning, and how you can really grow your vocab, your TOEFL vocab specifically, so that you're not guessing what these fancy words mean as you go through it. And I can provide the link later if you're unable to catch it now. Okay, so general test taking tips for TOEFL. Answer the easiest question first and then go back and spend more time on the complicated questions. If you are having a more difficult time with a question, you don't have that much time to be able to answer, or to spend, you know, all these minutes on answering one question, because you're going to run out of time to finish the test. So go through the ones that are easiest. The questions with the single response, like in the reading section, if there's one answer choice, those ones are worth around the same amount of points. The multiple choices are worth a little bit more, But if you're stuck on a question with one answer choice, you can always go back to it later. Make sure that you mark it though, put a star next to it so that you don't forget. Take a practice test or try practices online, like the reading questions that we practiced a little bit ago. That's actually from an actual Toefl passage that I found online. So these materials are available for you to go through. Once you take a few, you're going to be able to tell if there are certain problems or questions that you struggle with. And luckily, because the Toefl is organized in such a way that they try to test you in many kinds of different questions, you can study how to answer those specific questions. If you're having a hard time with table questions, then you know that that's the section that you need to focus on. If you're struggling with vocab, then you'll know, okay, I need to study vocab a little bit more before I take another test. Time yourself as well as you complete a full section. I think that is a super important piece of advice because as soon as you get the hang of taking it, that's awesome. It might be the case that you can actually fly through the sections without struggling on any questions for too long. But one of the things about time tests is that even good test takers sometimes struggle with timing. So because they're not giving you all day to be able to go through everything at your pace, make sure that you try to time yourself so that you know that you're not spending too much time on a few sections or that you're spending too much time in the beginning. That's just a way to make sure that you're on track. And then answer every question. So if you skip a question and you mean to go back to it, don't forget to go back to it because you will not lose points for guessing a wrong answer. So in that case, it's always good to make sure that you fill out every single question no matter what, just so that you increase your chances of getting it right, even if you have no idea what the answer is. Okay, so we're going to go into questions. As I'm going through these links, go ahead and send any questions that you might have from the two sections or maybe overall about the Toefl. But these are some, I know they're a little bit long, but here are some links that you can look up. There are definitely more resources that aren't included on this slide. But if you want to take a practice test or you want to look for more templates or go to the actual ETS website, ETS is what they make the Toefl exam, and so they're going to have the most updated and direct information. Okay, so I will actually leave this slide up if you guys want to jot it down, and I will go through. We have a few questions.
Do you want me to read the questions for you to go over them from the beginning?
Oh, sure, that'd be great.
Which section do you think is more difficult?
Okay, so that, I mean, I feel like this is a cop-out answer, but it's going to depend on the person, really, because again, many people struggle with the reading exam, sometimes because it's difficult, but also because people are not used to having to answer so many questions in the given time. So that's why I tried to include a lot of strategies for how to get through the test faster. Another section that we're going to be talking about tomorrow, but I know that people struggle with, is the listening portion, because you can't listen to the passage again. So we're going to go over that more tomorrow and tips for being able to do that. But by taking the practice test, maybe a few times, or practicing individual sections, you will be able to diagnose what you're struggling with more individually and focusing on. Maybe it's the time portion, maybe it's the vocab portion, maybe it's the type of question, and then go from there. I know that's pretty broad, but I hope that answers the question.
It's true, though. You really have to practice for the Toefl. It's what it is. So that's very true. Will it be written that the questions have multiple correct answers?
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Will it be written that the question has multiple correct answers?
Oh, yes, that will be written in some way. They will tell you. They're not going to just tell you that guess which ones have multiple answers. That would be really, really mean. So make sure that you're reading the instructions for every question that you start, because you'll be able to figure out from that one.
Okay, how are people taking the TOEFL now during COVID? What is the optimal length expected for the essays?
Okay, so many
different questions for the same person.
Okay, so many people take the online version of the TOEFL. The thing right now is that there's constantly just changing policies because people don't know what the world is looking like. So that's why people are able to take the test. I know that some centers are offering socially distant options to be able to take it, where you go to the test center and you have to just spread out. But those policies are always changing. So look up on the TOEFL website, ask the advisors at EducationUSA, the ones that know your testing centers around you. So unfortunately, I don't have like a solid answer for that one. But that's just because
always recommend also getting in touch with the university just to make sure. So we haven't really seen a lot of universities that don't accept the online version, but it's always good to check that they'll be okay with it.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's also a really good one. I know that a lot of universities, at least for the upcoming application cycle, are changing their requirements for the English proficiency exam too. And if it's too difficult to take the TOEFL in your area, then some universities are actually accepting other forms that are easier to take online too. And then the optimal length expected for the essays. So the optimal length, for the integrated essay, you're going to try to shoot between 150 and 250 words. I think it'll be really difficult to be able to thoroughly talk about your ideas in anything less than 150, even 200. I write a lot, so that's just me. But try to make sure you have a few solid paragraphs for that, like 4 to 5 sentences. Your claim doesn't have to be your intro doesn't have to be very long. You can honestly just start your intro paragraph with your thesis statement and then jump right into adding the evidence, because integrating the evidence and talking about how that supports your thesis statement is the most important part of your test. And then for the independent essay, you're going to have 10 more minutes to be able to write it, and you're not going to have a passage to read. So try to get closer to probably 300 for that one. Again, you need to be able to flesh out all of your ideas and to support whatever evidence you're bringing in, whether it's personal experience or anything that you can think of, any weird facts that that will be applicable to the actual prompt. As long as you're able to flesh that out very thoroughly, you should be good. But yeah, I can't see anything less than 200 words as something as thorough.
Okay, so the next question I think you already answered, which is about the multiple right answers, but we just got one. How much time do you recommend for studying each day?
How much time do I recommend for
studying each day?
Studying each day. Okay, so that's also a more difficult one because it depends on how prepared you feel, right? When I took standardized tests back in the day, I would take a full practice test every Sunday. I was a very, very determined 16-year-old at the time. And that was a lot of time. That was like 4 hours every weekend, but also not everyone is able to do that. So I think that's another reason to really figure out if you need to budget your time, figure out which sections you're really struggling with, focus on those, you know, every day if you can, even if it's just studying vocab or doing a section every week. But I think definitely taking a full practice exam at some point, because especially since you have to do all 4 sections of the TOEFL, you're not going to get a break. You're not going to get time to really recover before you jump into another hour-long section. Try to do that, because also you don't want to take the TOEFL and then figure out that you could have done more preparation after spending all that money to do it. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Mariana.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's so true. You have to do practice tests. There is a lot of material online that you can find for the practicing. And there is also a practice test by ETS that you can pay for, and it's timed. So that's very helpful because you kind of get the feeling of actually doing the test, and especially now that you can do the test at home, it's kind of the same feeling. Could you send us this presentation? So we are recording this presentation. Someone else had also asked when it will be available. We will let you all know once we upload it on one of our platforms and how you can get it. Okay. Any last questions? Final questions?
And yeah, just a reminder, tomorrow at the same time, I'll be going over the other 2 sections, the listening and the speaking, with an overview of those sections. So if you have questions that are more specific to those, hopefully the presentation or the Q&A after will clear those up.
Okay, perfect. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Noelani, for the great presentation. It's very clarifying. I'm sure it helped a lot of people. And if anyone has any other questions and want to reach out to EducationUSA, please do. We are here to help you with any questions you have about U.S. higher education. Thank you, everyone.